A flight from New York to London. A cabin crew smug in their authority. A black woman in seat 23B dismissed, ignored and treated as if she were invisible. They thought she was just another passenger they could sideline. They couldn't have been more wrong. They rolled their eyes at her requests for water and a blanket, not knowing her notebook was filled with observations food would cost them their wings. She wasn't just flying to London. She was there to inspect the entire airline, and their high-altitude power trip was about to crash into a reality they never saw coming. The air in the Stellaris Air First Class Lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of hushed tones, clinking glasses, and the scent of expensive perfume. Dr. Imani Carter, however, wasn't in the lounge. She was in the chaotic sea of humanity at Gate B42, deliberately immersing herself in the standard passenger experience. Her ticket, a full-fare economy seat 23B, was her camouflage. Imani wasn't your average traveler. At 42, she held a PhD in aeronautical engineering and a formidable reputation as the lead auditor for the Federal Aviation Administration's new initiative, the Aviation Culture and Quality Assurance ACQA program. After a series of high-profile airline meltdowns, the FAA had realized that safety wasn't just about mechanics and flight hours. It was about the very culture of an airline, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. Imani was a ghost, a secret shopper with the power to ground fleets and end careers. Her current target, Stellaris Air, a carrier whose glossy advertisements promised the apex of air travel. Her disguise was simple, comfortable travel pants, a worn but clean hoodie from her alma mater, Howard University, and her hair in a neat wrap. She carried a simple backpack and a tote bag. To the world, she was just another woman heading home or on holiday. The first crack in Stellaris Air's gleaming facade appeared at the boarding gate. The agent, a harried man named Ken, called for pre-boarding. An elderly couple, a family with a toddler, and several passengers in wheelchairs made their way forward. When Imani, whose ticket was in boarding Group 2, approached the line as it began to move, a lead flight attendant with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda put a stiff hand up. "Group 2 isn't boarding yet," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. She gestured vaguely towards the back of the snaking queue. Imani glanced at the screen. Group 2, now boarding, was flashing in bright blue letters. The screen says, "Group 2 is boarding," she stated calmly, holding up her ticket. Brenda's smile tightened. "We're still assisting priority passengers. You'll have to wait." She then turned and beamed at a white man in a crisp suit who had just walked up, also holding a Group 2 ticket. "Right this way, sir. Welcome aboard." Imani didn't argue. She simply stepped back, took out a small, unassuming notebook from her tote, and made a note. Gate B42, 1842, EST. Lead FA Brenda Walsh exhibited biased boarding procedure, selectively enforcing group order. See Passenger Manifest Seat 4A versus 23B. 15 minutes later, when she finally shuffled down the jet bridge, she was met at the aircraft door by a junior flight attendant. He was young, with a smarmy, overgelled haircut and a name tag reading Chad. "Welcome," he chirped, his eyes flicking over her hoodie and immediately dismissing her. He turned his full attention to the blonde woman behind her, offering to help with her designer carry-on. Imani found her seat, 23B, a middle seat, as planned. Her goal was to be as unremarkable as possible. She slid her backpack under the seat in front of her and tried to place her tote bag, which contained her laptop and sensitive documents, in the overhead bin. The bin directly above her was already full. She spotted a space in the bin across the aisle. As she lifted her bag, Chad materialized. "Ma'am, that space is being saved," he said, his tone suggesting she should have known better. "Saved for whom?" Imani asked, her voice even. "Overhead space is first come, first served, isn't it? We need to reserve it for our Apex Gold members who may board later." "You can find space further back," he said dismissively, gesturing vaguely towards the rear of the plane before turning his attention to flirting with a passenger in 22D. Imani sighed internally. Another note. F.A. Chad Peterson, enforcement of non-existent reserved bin space policy. Unequal application of cabin rules. She walked 10 rows back to find a spot for her bag, forcing her to swim against the tide of boarding passengers. As she settled into her seat, wedged between a large man who immediately claimed both armrests and a teenager with noise-canceling headphones, she felt the familiar pang. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, professional disappointment. This was the culture. This subtle, pervasive pattern of dismissal, of being seen as less than, was exactly what the ACTUA was designed to identify and eradicate. The boarding process dragged on. Captain David Harrison's voice crackled over the intercom, a smooth, confident baritone that spoke of 1,000 uneventful flights. He apologized for a slight ground delay and promised a smooth ride over the pond. Imani knew the delay wasn't slight. They were already 40 minutes behind schedule, a fact Brenda and Chad seemed to blame on the passengers themselves, sighing dramatically as they slammed overhead bins shut. The safety demonstration was a blur of half-hearted pointing and bored expressions. Chad caught Brenda's eye during the demonstration and gave a subtle eye roll as he pointed to the oxygen mask, a clear mockery of the process. Imani jotted it down. Crew demonstrates clear contempt for safety briefing protocols. Nonverbal communication suggests lack of seriousness, potential for passenger confusion in a real emergency. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Imani pressed the flight attendant call button. She wanted a bottle of water before takeoff, a simple test of responsiveness. The light above her head illuminated. 5 minutes passed. Chad walked by, saw the light, made eye contact with Imani, and then continued on his way to the galley. 10 minutes. Brenda bustled past her face, a mask of importance, completely ignoring the lit call button. The plane taxied to the runway. The engines spooled up. The call light remained on a tiny beacon of neglect. Just before the final takeoff roll, Brenda walked down the aisle one last time. She saw the light, looked at Imani with pure annoyance, and pressed the button to turn it off without a word. Then she leaned in her voice, a low hiss. "The call button is for in-flight use only and only for emergencies. We are about to take off." She didn't wait for a response. She simply turned and walked back to her jump seat. Imani stared ahead as the plane hurtled down the runway and lifted into the darkening New York sky. She opened her notebook again. The page was already filling up. This was going to be a very, very long flight. And for Stellaris Air, it was going to be a very, very expensive one. The climb to cruising altitude was smooth, a testament to the Rolls-Royce engines humming steadily on the wings of the Boeing 787. For most passengers, it was a time to settle in, to choose a movie, to anticipate the meal service. For Imani Carter, it was an observation post in a high-stakes field study. An hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin crew, led by Brenda, began their service preparation. The clatter from the galley was sharp, punctuated by loud laughter. It sounded less like a professional crew at work and more like a college dorm kitchen. Imani decided to try the water test again. She pressed the call button. The little light above 23B dutifully switched on. She waited and waited. Chad eventually emerged from the galley, pushing the drink cart. He started at the front of the economy cabin, his smile beaming for the passengers in the bulkhead seats. He moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding Imani's gaze, even as he passed her row. The lights stayed on. When he finally reached her row, he served the man at the window and the teenager on the aisle. He then started to push the cart past her. "Excuse me, Imani," said her voice, calm but clear. Chad stopped, an expression of pained patience on his face. "Yes, I pressed the call button about 20 minutes ago. Could I please have a bottle of water?" He sighed, a theatrical puff of air. "The drink service is on its way. As you can see, I would have gotten to you." He grabbed a plastic cup, scooped some ice into it with a flick of his wrist, and poured water from a large jug. He handed it to her without a tray, the condensation already making the thin plastic slick. "Here. Thank you. I'd prefer a bottle if possible. We only have bottled water for the Apex Gold cabin up front. This is what we serve back here." He lied. Imani knew for a fact that FAA regulations required potable water to be available to all passengers, and Stellaris's own service manual specified providing bottles upon request, inventory permitting. She had memorized the manual. F.A. Chad Peterson. Dishonest response to passenger request. Falsely claimed service limitations. Deliberate withholding of standard amenities. She made the note, her pen scratching quietly. Next came the meal service orchestrated by Brenda. She moved with an air of practiced authority, slapping trays down with a thud. "Chicken or pasta?" she barked down the aisle. When she reached Imani's row, she served the two other passengers. Imani had pre-ordered a vegetarian meal, a standard practice for her. "I have a special meal order," she said. Brenda looked at her list, then at Imani, a flicker of something disbelief, annoyance in her eyes. "I don't have a special meal for 23B. Could you please double-check Dr. Imani Carter?" It was confirmed. Brenda shuffled her papers with exaggerated impatience. "Nope, not here. You must have forgotten to order it or did it too late. It's chicken or pasta. I have the confirmation email on my phone," Imani offered, reaching for her tote bag. "Ma'am, I have a whole cabin to feed." Brenda snapped, her voice rising. "I don't have time to read your emails. Do you want the chicken or the pasta before it's all gone?" The passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Imani felt the familiar heat of humiliation, but she suppressed it. This was data. Valuable, damning data. "I'll have the pasta," then she said quietly. Brenda slapped the tray down. It was a congealed, lukewarm mess. As Brenda moved to the next row, Chad followed her. In a clumsy maneuver, he jostled the arm of the passenger in 22B, who was trying to open a can of soda. The can slipped, erupting in a fizzing geyser, a significant portion of which landed directly on Imani's lap and her open notebook. "Oh!" the passenger exclaimed, mortified. Chad just laughed. "Bit of turbulence, eh?" he said to the man, completely ignoring Imani. He handed the man a few napkins and moved on, not once acknowledging that Imani was soaked in sticky cold soda. Imani stared down at the dark stains spreading across her pants and the smeared ink on her notebook page. The notes were ruined. She took a deep, steadying breath. She closed the notebook, blotted her pants with one of her own tissues, and said nothing. Her silence was a reservoir of gathering storm clouds. Gross negligence and unprofessionalism from F.A. Chad Peterson following a service spill. Failed to assist or apologize to the affected passenger. 23B. Lead F.A. Brenda Walsh witnessed incident took no corrective action. Conspicuous disregard for passenger welfare. Later in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed, Imani felt a chill. The cabin was notoriously cold over the Atlantic. She saw Chad distributing blankets and pillows to other passengers. She tried to catch his eye. He looked right through her. She got up and walked back to the galley. Brenda and Chad were leaning against a counter, scrolling on their personal phones, a clear violation of sterile cockpit and cabin rules during non-rest periods. "Excuse me," Imani said. Brenda looked up, her face a mask of irritation at being interrupted. "What is it now? I'm quite cold. I was wondering if I could possibly have a blanket." Brenda didn't even look. "We've run out. They go fast." Imani's eyes swept the galley. On a lower shelf, clearly visible, was a stack of at least a dozen plastic-wrapped blankets. She pointed. "What are those?" Brenda's eyes narrowed. The pretense was gone, replaced by open hostility. "Those are reserved for the crew, and for first class if they need extras. We're not provisioned to give everyone in economy a personal blanket." The lie was so blatant, so needlessly cruel, that it was almost breathtaking. It wasn't about a shortage of blankets. It was about power. It was about putting this passenger in her place. "I see," Imani said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Thank you for your time." She walked back to her seat, shivering. She wrapped her soda-stained hoodie tighter around herself. She didn't need her notebook anymore. The violations were seared into her memory, each one a nail in the coffin of Brenda Walsh's and Chad Peterson's careers. They thought they were asserting their dominance over a nobody in seat 23B. They had no idea they were writing their own termination letters. With every dismissive glance, every lie, every act of petty cruelty. The karma was coming. It was circling at 35,000 feet, just waiting for the right moment to descend. The flight droned on through the dark, a silver tube, suspended in the vast emptiness between continents. Most of the cabin was asleep, a landscape of tilted heads and slack jaws under the dim blue glow of the cabin lights. Imani, unable to get comfortable in her damp, cold clothes, remained awake, her mind methodically cataloguing the litany of failures. The crew's behavior had transcended mere poor service. It was a systemic breakdown of professionalism, a cultural rot that started with contempt and could easily end in catastrophe. And then it happened. A strangled gasp cut through the cabin's quiet hum. It came from a few rows ahead of Imani in the apex gold section Chad had so fiercely protected. An elderly man who had been traveling with his wife was clutching his chest. His face was pale, beaded with sweat, and his breathing was rapid and shallow. His wife cried out, "Henry, Henry, what's wrong? Help, somebody, help!" The cry for help jolted the cabin. Passengers stirred, craning their necks. Chad, who had been dozing in a galley jump seat, rushed over, his face a canvas of panic. Brenda was close behind, her usual composure fractured. Sir, can you hear me?" Chad asked, his voice an octave too high. The man, Henry, couldn't respond. He just gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" Brenda demanded of the wife, as if she were somehow at fault. "I don't know, he just grabbed his chest. He has a heart condition," the woman sobbed. Brenda's training, however rusty, kicked in on a superficial level. Okay. Chad, get the emergency medical kit. And page for a doctor. Now." Chad fumbled with the intercom, his voice shaking. "Attention passengers. We have a medical situation. If there is a medical doctor or a registered nurse on board, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately." He repeated the call twice. Silence. The only response was the rising tide of passenger anxiety. Brenda opened the onboard medical kit, a red box filled with supplies. She stared at its contents, a stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, oxygen masks, as if she'd never seen them before. Her face was ashen. Her authority had evaporated, replaced by raw, undisguised fear. This was the moment. The critical incident where training and temperament are all that stand between order and chaos. And the crew of Stellaris Air Flight 101 was failing. Imani watched for another 10 seconds, giving them every chance to take control. They didn't. Brenda was fumbling with a blood pressure cuff, trying to wrap it over the man's thick sweater. Chad was just standing there, wringing his hands. Enough. Imani unbuckled her seatbelt. With a quiet "excuse me" to her row-mates, she stood up and walked forward. As she approached the scene, Brenda looked up and saw her. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat right now," Brenda snapped, finding a sliver of her old authority in the command. Imani ignored her. She knelt beside the ailing man, her presence immediately calming. "Ma'am," she said to the distraught wife, her voice low and steady, "my name is Imani. I have medical training. Can you tell me his name and what heart condition he has?" Henry, the wife, wept. "He has atrial fibrillation. He had an ablation last year." Imani's focus sharpened. She placed 2 fingers on Henry's carotid artery, feeling for a pulse. It was rapid and frighteningly irregular. His skin was clammy. Brenda Imani said, her use of the flight attendant's first name so firm and natural that Brenda was too stunned to object. "I need the supplemental oxygen, and I need you to have the captain notify our destination of a medical emergency. Tell them we have a male mid-70s with a history of AFib, presenting with tachycardia, shortness of breath, and possible cardiac ischemia. We need a priority landing and paramedics on the ground." The level of specific technical detail was like a splash of cold water. Chad and Brenda just stared. Now Imani commanded, her voice cutting through their paralysis. Chad scurried off toward the cockpit. Brenda, fumbling, handed Imani the small green oxygen tank. Imani expertly fitted the mask over Henry's face and turned the valve. "Henry," she said, looking directly into the man's terrified eyes, "my name is Imani. I'm here to help you. I need you to try and take slow, deep breaths for me. Just focus on my voice." She turned to Brenda, who was still holding the blood pressure cuff like a foreign object. "Give me that," Imani said, not unkindly. She quickly and efficiently took his blood pressure, her brow furrowed in concentration. She took the stethoscope and listened to his heart and lungs. The information was flowing into her brain, being processed with a speed and clarity that left the crew looking like statues. "His pressure is dropping. We need to get his legs elevated," she instructed. "Chad, help me." Chad, returning from the cockpit, moved as if in a trance. Together, they gently repositioned Henry, elevating his feet on a carry-on bag. For the next 20 minutes, as the plane began its expedited descent toward London, Imani was the calm center of the storm. She monitored Henry's vitals, spoke to him in soothing tones, and reassured his wife. She didn't just handle the medical situation. She managed the entire scene, her quiet competence radiating outwards, calming the nearby passengers and giving the terrified crew a focal point. Captain Harrison came on the intercom. "Folks, as you may be aware, we have a medical situation on board. We are in direct contact with medical professionals on the ground and have been given priority clearance into Heathrow. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 25 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Brenda, standing uselessly to the side, watched Imani, the woman from 23B, the woman she had refused water to, the woman she had dismissed, mocked, and denied a blanket. This woman was now single-handedly managing a life-or-death situation with more proficiency than she had ever seen. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Who was she? As the plane banked over the glittering lights of London, Henry's breathing had steadied. The color was returning to his face. He was still in distress, but he was stable. He was going to make it. Imani gave his wife's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The woman looked at her, her eyes filled with more gratitude than words could ever express. "Thank you," she whispered. "God, thank you." Imani simply nodded. Her job here was almost done, in more ways than one. The Boeing 787 touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow with a gentle bump, the pilots executing a flawless landing under pressure. Before the plane had even taxied to the gate, the flashing blue lights of emergency vehicles were visible, racing to meet them. As Captain Harrison announced they were waiting for paramedics to board the cabin, was silent, save for the soft weeping of Henry's wife, a sound of relief, now not terror. Imani remained with Henry, holding his hand and monitoring his pulse until the very moment the paramedic team came through the door. She gave them a concise, professional handover. Male 76 history of atrial fibrillation, onset of tachycardia and dyspnea approximately 30 minutes ago. Vitals stabilized after administering O2 and elevating his legs. BP is now 110/70. Pulse is around 95, but regularized. He's fully conscious and responsive. The lead paramedic, a burly man with a kind face, was impressed. "You've done all the hard work for us. Are you a doctor, ma'am?" "I have some experience," Imani replied evasively. As they carefully transferred Henry to a gurney, his wife Eleanor grabbed Imani's arm. "I don't even know your name. How can I ever thank you? I'm Imani. And you don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I could help. You focus on him," she said, with a warm smile. With the paramedics gone, a sense of normalcy began to return. Passengers started gathering their belongings, their conversations a low buzz about the drama they had just witnessed. Several people who had seen Imani's intervention looked at her with newfound respect and admiration. The crew, however, seemed determined to reclaim their territory. Brenda, her face still pale, but her imperious tone returning, made an announcement. "We will be deplaning shortly. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." She pointedly did not look at Imani. Chad, in a stunning display of oblivious arrogance, approached Imani as she returned to her seat. "Well," he said with a smirk, "guess all that TV medical drama pays off, huh? Good job playing doctor." Imani looked at him. She didn't say a word. The silence was more unnerving than any retort. She simply sat down, gathered her backpack, and waited. Once the plane docked and the seatbelt sign was off, the passengers began to file out. Imani retrieved her tote bag from the bin 10 rows back and joined the slow-moving queue. As she passed the cockpit, the door was open. Captain David Harrison stood there, thanking passengers for flying Stellaris Air. When Imani passed, he gave her a cursory nod. "Thanks for the help back there. We had it under control, but appreciate the enthusiasm." The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was positioning her as a helpful bystander, a civilian who got involved not as the professional who had single-handedly averted a tragedy while his crew floundered. He was protecting his and his crew's image. Imani met his gaze. "You're welcome, Captain." She made a mental note. Captain Harrison, post-incident, minimized civilian intervention while displaying ignorance of crew's failure. Attempt to control narrative rather than acknowledge breakdown of protocol. Brenda and Chad were at the exit, their plastic smiles firmly back in place. "Bye-bye. Thanks for flying, Stellaris," they chirped, their eyes glazing over as Imani walked past. To them, she was once again the invisible woman from 23B, a temporary dramatic anomaly who would now disappear from their lives forever. They were wrong. Imani deplaned and followed the signs for flight connections. The rest of the passengers headed towards immigration and baggage claim. The flight crew, Captain Harrison, Brenda, and Chad, emerged a few minutes later, wheeling their bags and laughing about something. They were heading for the Crew Operations Center for their routine post-flight debrief and sign-off. They walked down a long, sterile corridor marked Crew and Authorized Personnel Only, swiping their ID cards to get through a secure door. As the door was closing, a hand gently stopped it. Imani Carter stepped through. Brenda spun around, her face instantly souring. "Mom, you can't be back here. This is a restricted area. You need to go to baggage claim." "It's all right, Brenda," Imani said, her voice devoid of the warmth she'd shown Henry's wife. It was now cool, crisp, and resonant, with an authority that had nothing to do with saving a life and everything to do with ending a career. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Captain Harrison stepped forward, his captain-in-charge demeanor kicking in. "Ma'am, I'm not going to say this again. This is a secure area of the airport. You are trespassing. I'll have to call security." "That won't be necessary, David," said a voice with a clipped British accent. A man in a sharply tailored suit emerged from an office down the hall. He was Alistair Finch, the UK Operations Director for Stellaris Air. He walked directly to Imani, his hand extended. "Dr. Carter," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "Welcome to Heathrow. I trust your flight was informative." The irony in his tone was razor-sharp. Imani shook his hand. "Alistair, it was more than informative. It was a goldmine." The jaws of Captain Harrison, Brenda Walsh, and Chad Peterson collectively dropped. Their faces cycled through a rapid sequence of confusion, disbelief, and dawning gut-wrenching horror. They looked at the woman in the travel-worn hoodie, her pants still faintly stained with soda. The woman they had ignored, lied to, and patronized. And in that moment, they didn't see a passenger from 23B. They saw the executioner of their careers. Alistair Finch gestured towards a large conference room. "The entire senior management team is waiting for your preliminary report. This way, Doctor." He then glanced back at the petrified crew. "Captain Harrison, Ms. Walsh, Mr. Peterson, you will join us. Your debriefing has just been moved up, and I suggest you think very, very carefully about what you're going to say." The Stellaris Air Heathrow conference room was a bubble of corporate sterility, a long mahogany table, ergonomic chairs, and a panoramic window overlooking the bustling airfield. Usually, it was a place for routine operational reviews. Today, it was an execution chamber. Seated at the table were Alistair Finch, the UK Operations Director, a severe-looking woman who was the airline's global head of in-flight services, flown in from Chicago, and the airline's chief pilot for the European sector. They sat in a grim line, their faces telegraphing that they had already been briefed on the magnitude of the situation. Captain Harrison, Brenda Walsh, and Chad Peterson were instructed to sit on the opposite side of the table. The confidence they wore like a uniform had been stripped away, leaving them looking small and exposed under the fluorescent lights. The door opened, and Dr. Imani Carter walked in. She had shed her travel-worn hoodie. She now wore a crisp blazer she had retrieved from her tote bag. She carried a tablet computer. She was no longer a passenger. She was the embodiment of regulatory power. She took her place at the head of the table, flanked by Alistair. The shift in dynamics was absolute. "Good morning, Imani," began her voice, calm and measured, yet it filled the room with an unnerving gravity. "This is the preliminary debrief for Stellaris Air Flight 101, JFK to Heathrow, June 26, 2025. This flight was the subject of a covert audit under the FAA's Aviation Culture and Quality Assurance Program. I was your auditor." She looked directly at the three crew members. Their faces were pale masks of dread. "The purpose of the ACQA is to assess not just technical compliance, but the human factor, the culture, the core values an airline demonstrates when no one is watching, or when they think no one is watching." She tapped her tablet, and a file projected onto the large screen behind her. It was a list. Let's start at the beginning. Gate B42, JFK, lead flight attendant Brenda Walsh. Brenda flinched as her name was called. "You selectively enforced boarding group policies, denying boarding to me, a valid Group 2 passenger, while immediately permitting another passenger of the same group to board. This is a violation not only of Stellaris' own fair treatment policy, but also creates a perception of biased service, which is the first thread in unraveling passenger trust. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Brenda stammered. I was just trying to manage the flow. It was crowded. It was." Imani agreed. "And yet you managed the flow in a way that specifically benefited one passenger and delayed another. That isn't management. It's prejudice." Imani swiped the screen. Next, on board, flight attendant Chad Peterson. Chad looked as if he was about to be physically ill. "You invented a non-existent Apex Gold reserved bin space policy to prevent me from stowing my carry-on. The Stellaris Service Manual Section 4, Subsection B clearly states all overhead bin space is communal and available on a first-come, first-served basis with crew assistance mandated for passengers requiring it. You did not assist. You obstructed. Why, I thought..." Chad's voice was a squeak. "I was trying to ensure our best customers had room." "Your best customers are all customers," Mr. Peterson Imani countered icily. "Your job is to apply the rules equally, not to create a caste system at 35,000 feet. Your actions were a direct contradiction of your training." She continued, her voice relentless. "The safety briefing." Both Ms. Walsh and Mr. Peterson displayed non-verbal contempt for the briefing, including eye-rolling and mimicry. This behavior is captured on aircraft surveillance video, which we will be reviewing. It undermines the single most critical communication we have with passengers. It fosters a culture where safety is seen as a joke. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Now let's talk about passenger requests." I pressed the call button twice. The first time prior to takeoff, it was ignored by both of you before being cancelled without a word by Ms. Walsh, accompanied by a lecture. The second time, it was ignored for over 20 minutes. When I requested a bottle of water from Mr. Peterson, I was lied to. He claimed they were unavailable in economy. However, galley inventory logs, which I've already requested, will show ample stock. Ms. Walsh, you repeated this pattern of dishonesty when I requested a blanket, claiming none were available while standing less than 3 feet from a stack of them. Brenda's face crumpled. "We have to keep some in reserve. You are permitted a crew reserve." "Yes," Imani cut in, her voice sharp as steel. "But you are not permitted to lie to a passenger. You could have said, 'These are our last few, and we must hold them for potential medical situations.' That would have been professional. Instead, you chose deception and disdain. That is a cultural failure." She swiped again. A still image from the cabin surveillance video appeared on screen. It showed the soda can exploding, drenching her. The service incident. Mr. Peterson, you caused a spill that soiled my clothes and property. You failed to acknowledge it, apologize, or offer any assistance. Ms. Walsh, you observed this failure and did nothing. This isn't just poor service, it's dehumanizing. It communicates to a passenger that they are literally not worth acknowledging. Finally, she arrived at the crux of the matter, the medical emergency. The room became deathly quiet. When a passenger experienced cardiac distress, the cabin crew's response was a catastrophic failure of training and temperament. You panicked. Your initial actions were incorrect and delayed proper care. You were unable to operate basic medical equipment. You failed to take control of the scene. Had a trained professional not been present by sheer coincidence, your fumbling could have had fatal consequences. Your primary job is not to serve drinks. It is for passenger safety and to be the first responders in an emergency. In that, you failed. Completely. She turned her gaze to the captain. Captain Harrison, you remained on the flight deck, which is procedurally correct. However, your post-incident comments to me revealed a dangerous desire to whitewash the event. You claimed you had it under control and patronized my intervention as enthusiasm. The situation in the cabin was unequivocally not under control. Your crew was failing. Your duty as captain is to have a full and honest understanding of your crew's capabilities and failures. Your attempt to create a false narrative is, in my view, one of the most serious offenses of all. It's a failure of leadership and a rot that jeopardizes every single flight under your command. Imani leaned back in her chair. The demolition was complete. Alistair Finch cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. Dr. Carter's preliminary report is devastating. It paints a picture of a culture not of the apex of air travel, but of systemic rot, of arrogance, negligence, and prejudice. He looked at the three crew members, his face carved from granite. Captain Harrison, you are suspended pending a full flight review board and FAA inquiry. Hand over your credentials. Miss Walsh, Mr. Peterson, consider your employment with Stellaris Air terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the premises. Your records will reflect termination for gross misconduct, including endangerment of passengers. Brenda let out a strangled sob. Over 20 years of her life, her seniority, her pension all gone in an instant. Chad sat frozen, the color drained from his face, his future in aviation erased. Captain Harrison, a man of immense pride, simply stared at the table, his empire of clouds having crumbled into dust. Imani Carter watched them not with triumph, but with a somber sense of duty. This wasn't personal. It was structural. It was a cancer she had been sent to cut out, and the surgery had been a success. This debrief is concluded, Alistair said. My team will now meet with Dr. Carter to discuss the next steps. The full audit of Stellaris Air has only just begun. The termination of 3 crew members was only the beginning. It was the first tremor of an earthquake that was about to rupture the entire foundation of Stellaris Air. Imani's report was a controlled internal detonation. The public fallout, however, would be a wildfire, sparked by a single unnoticed observer on Flight 101. A young tech entrepreneur from California seated in 21C had been horrified by the crew's treatment of Imani and impressed by her calm demeanor. But when the medical emergency began, his instincts kicked in. He didn't just watch, he discreetly filmed. He captured it all. Brenda's panic, Chad's uselessness, and then Imani, the passenger from the middle seat, stepping in and taking command. He filmed her confident instructions, her gentle care of Henry, and the crew standing by like chastened children. He also captured Captain Harrison's dismissive, "Thanks for the enthusiasm" remark at the door. He landed at Heathrow, heard the whispers of gratitude from Henry's wife, and felt a burning sense of injustice. That night, from his London hotel room, he edited the clips together into a 2-minute video. He gave it a simple, powerful title: "Flight Crew Ignores Black Passenger, Then She Saves a Man's Life When They Can't." He posted it to TikTok, Twitter, X, and YouTube. He didn't know Imani's name, so he just called her the hero in 23B. By the time London woke up, the video had 1 million views. By the time New York logged on, it was at 20 million and was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The story was irresistible. It was a David and Goliath tale for the modern age. The hashtags had Stellaris, Nightmare, had Hero in 23B, and Fire Brenda and Chad exploded. News outlets like CNN, the BBC, and Reuters scrambled to cover the story. They quickly identified the crew from the video footage. Then they found Henry's wife, Eleanor, who gave a tearful, heartfelt interview praising the angel who saved her husband and confirming the crew's utter incompetence. "They treated her horribly the entire flight," Eleanor told a reporter. "They were rude and dismissive, and then when my Henry collapsed, they were useless. This woman, this stranger, she was the only one who knew what to do. She saved his life. The airline should give her a medal, not ignore her." Stellaris Air's PR department was caught in a tsunami. Their initial statement was a textbook corporate blunder. Stellaris Air is aware of a video circulating on social media. "We take passenger safety very seriously and are conducting a full internal investigation into the matter." The public tore it to shreds. Investigation. "The whole world is the investigation," one comment read. "We saw what happened." Another screamed. The airline's stock price, which had been trading at a healthy $58 per share, began to hemorrhage value. It dropped 5% in the first hour of trading, then 10%, then 15%. Panicked investors were dumping the stock, terrified of the brand toxicity. By midday, over $2 billion had been wiped from the company's market capitalization. The real-life karma was brutal and swift. Brenda Walsh, now infamous, was hounded by reporters. Her photo was everywhere. Her 2 decades of service meant nothing. She lost her pension due to the gross misconduct clause. Her union, after viewing the evidence from Imani's report and the public video, refused to support her appeal. She became a pariah, a symbol of entitled, prejudiced service. Chad Peterson's life imploded. His smirking face became a meme for incompetence. He was flooded with hateful messages. Any dream he had of a career in aviation was gone. He was blacklisted, his name a warning in airline HR departments globally. Captain David Harrison's fate was perhaps the most devastating. The review board, armed with Imani's report and the captain's own damning words on camera, was merciless. They didn't just suspend him. They recommended a full revocation of his air transport pilot license to the FAA. His reputation as a top-tier pilot built over 30 years was annihilated. He was disgraced, a captain who had lost command of his crew, his aircraft's culture, and ultimately his own integrity. The fallout spread. Passengers started canceling Stellaris Air tickets in droves. Corporate clients, including several Fortune 500 companies, announced they were suspending their travel contracts with the airline citing concerns over safety culture and corporate values. The CEO of Stellaris Air, a man named Mark Compton, who usually remained insulated in the executive suite, was forced to schedule a press conference. The company wasn't just in a PR crisis, it was in a fight for its very survival. Meanwhile, Dr. Imani Carter remained out of the public eye. The FAA and Stellaris management protected her identity fiercely. She was still in London, working with Alistair Finch's team, digging deeper into the airline's training manuals, hiring practices, and complaint logs. She was building a mountain of evidence. The viral video was just the tip of the iceberg. She was mapping the entire glacier beneath the surface. She watched the news reports, saw the stock price plummet, and read the stories about the crew. She felt no joy, only a grim satisfaction. This was the system working. The hard karma hitting back wasn't just about 3 people losing their jobs. It was about a multi-billion-dollar corporation being brought to its knees, forced to confront the rot it had allowed to fester within. The world was screaming for accountability, and Imani was quietly preparing the bill. The press conference was a global spectacle. Mark Compton, CEO of Stellaris Air, stood at a podium against a backdrop of the company logo, his face a haggard mask of contrition. The room was packed with journalists, their cameras flashing like a swarm of angry fireflies. "There are no excuses," Compton began, his voice strained. "What happened on Flight 101 was an indefensible failure, a failure of our crew, a failure of our training, and ultimately, a failure of my leadership. We betrayed the trust of our passengers and the public. Today, I am announcing my resignation as CEO of Stellaris Air, effective immediately." The announcement sent a shockwave through the financial world. It was a stunning admission of defeat. But Compton wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, "We have been cooperating fully with the FAA and their lead auditor from the ACQA program. The auditor was, in fact, the passenger who was so egregiously mistreated and who stepped in to save a life during the medical emergency. Her findings have exposed deep systemic issues within our corporate culture. We have not been living up to our promise of being the apex of air travel. We have been complacent, and in some corners of our airline, a culture of arrogance and prejudice was allowed to grow. That ends today." He then laid out a series of radical sweeping changes clearly drafted under immense pressure from Imani's ongoing audit. First, the entire global in-flight services management team was being replaced. Second, the airline was grounding 10% of its fleet for a month to facilitate a mandatory top-to-bottom retraining of all 15,000 of its flight crew and pilots. This retraining wouldn't be a simple PowerPoint presentation. It would be an intensive program designed in consultation with diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, as well as aviation safety psychologists. And the person appointed by the board and the FAA to oversee this monumental task, Dr. Imani Carter. Stellaris Air was not just paying her a consulting fee, they were effectively handing her the keys to rebuild their entire service and safety culture from the ground up. It was an unprecedented move. The airline wasn't just trying to fix a PR problem, it was performing open-heart surgery on itself, with Imani as the chief surgeon. The months that followed were grueling. Imani worked relentlessly, not from a corner office, but from training centers, crew lounges, and simulators. She dismantled the old training modules that paid lip service to customer service and replaced them with rigorous scenario-based programs. Crews were now drilled on de-escalation, unconscious bias, and crisis management, with actors playing out difficult passenger situations, including ones based directly on her experience on Flight 101. She championed a new just culture reporting system, where employees could report failures, their own or others, without fear of reprisal, shifting the focus from blame to learning. She instituted a passenger bill of rights that was printed on every ticket jacket. The transformation was painful and expensive, costing the airline hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue and investment. But slowly, a new Stellaris Air began to emerge. The story of Flight 101 became a cautionary tale told to every new hire, a permanent part of the company's DNA. 6 months later, a flight was preparing to depart from JFK to Heathrow. A woman settled into seat 23B. She was Dr. Imani Carter, but today she wasn't an auditor. She was a regular passenger flying to London for a final review of the program's implementation. A young flight attendant, with a warm, genuine smile, approached her. "Ma'am, I see you're in the middle seat. We have an open aisle seat in the exit row if you'd be more comfortable. There's extra leg room." Imani smiled. "Thank you, that's very kind." As she moved to her new seat, another flight attendant came by. "Can I get you some water or anything else before we take off?" he asked, holding up a bottle. During the flight, the service was impeccable. It wasn't obsequious or fake, it was professional, attentive, and equitable. The crew was alert, courteous to everyone, and moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of good training and pride in their work. Looking out the window at the endless blue sky, Imani felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The karma that had struck down Brenda Chad and Captain Harrison hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about creating the space for change. A corporation had been humbled, a culture had been reborn, and the skies were just a little bit safer, a little bit fairer. All because the crew of Flight 1 made the fatal mistake of ignoring the woman in 23B, never imagining she had the power to inspect and rebuild their entire world. And that's the story of how one woman's quiet dignity in the face of blatant prejudice brought a corporate giant to its knees and sparked a revolution in the skies. It's a powerful reminder that true authority isn't in a uniform or a title, but in integrity and competence. The karma that hit the crew of Flight 101 wasn't just a satisfying twist. It was a necessary consequence that forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. What did you think of the crew's actions and the fallout that followed? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar while traveling? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are important because they highlight the real-world impact of culture and accountability. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true-life dramas where the truth always comes to light. Thanks for listening.